What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's some of my final thoughts ahead of the Game Week 24 deadline. So I'm going to go through the latest information and news from the press conferences, answer some of your questions, and take a quick look at my own team as well. So if you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. And let's start off with Mitrovic, where the frustration, the pain, the misery, it just never ends, and now he's flagged in FPL. So Marco Silva's press conference was on Thursday, and he said he will probably have a full squad available. However, he did name-check Mitrovic and Willian, who have got knocks apparently, and Robinson with illness as players that he needs to assess. Now, as a Mitrovic owner, I'm not particularly worried, because he seems to be a doubt every single week and then continues to start. We don't know whether this is a reoccurrence of something he suffered from before, or whether it's a new knot, but he just seems like the type of player that will play through injuries where he can. So I think he will start against Brighton away. That being said, if you are someone that owns him and you've been looking to get rid of him sooner rather than later anyway, this might be the excuse that you need. I know a lot of people are looking at João Felix. He's been transferred in by nearly 200,000 FPL managers at this point. They've got Southampton at home this week. They've also got a fixture in Game Week 25, albeit for Chelsea it's a little bit more difficult than for Fulham because they've got Spurs away, Fulham have got Wolves at home, but then it's Leeds at home, they've got a fixture in 28, and I just think João Felix is an all-round great pick. I think his minutes will be decent, and although we haven't seen him play that many games for Chelsea so far, every time he has, he's looked impressive, so I really like him as a pick. The other player that people will be looking at, and this is the one that I am, is Ivan Toney, but he blanks in Game Week 25, he's got the double in 27, so if you're going to swap Mitrovic to Toney, that transfer can probably wait until Game Week 26. Ultimately, look, we don't know if he's on penalties anymore, but we know he's nailed when he's fit, right? And he's going to get good minutes, and his open play goal threat has been pretty decent for most of the season, even if he hasn't done well recently. But ultimately, I don't think that Fulham's fixtures are so good you need to worry about holding on to him. Like Brighton away this week is going to be tricky, even if he does end up playing. Brentford away is okay, but it's not, like, I wouldn't put it down as an easy fixture. Then you've got to play Arsenal. The Liverpool away game might not even be on. So the next run, which looks really good for Fulham, is from 29 onwards. And by that point, who knows, we might have played wild cards, free hits, etc. So I think it's perfectly fine if you want to sell Mitrovic. But if you don't have the transfers or the cash and you're in a situation like me, and that is basically where I'm at, where I probably just can't sell him, I'm not really that worried, and he does have a fixture in Game Week 25, which is pretty decent, so holding on to him for 2 more game weeks wouldn't be the end of the world. So a few people asked about the latest on Nathan Patterson, probably because he's sat on their bench. They're hopefully be back for Game Week 25, where of course it's a blank game week for some teams and a double game week for Everton. Now, Sean Dyche did talk about him in the press conference. He said James Garner and Nathan Patterson will play with the under-21s this week, so that is positive in that he'll be building up fitness in that game and then hopeful of getting back into the first team squad and playing minutes there as well. But you've got to think that if he's only just playing for the under-21s and we're already at Game Week 24, it seems highly unlikely that he would start either game in Game Week 25 unless he's really able to prove his fitness, or if Seamus Coleman is not fit enough to play both of those games or something like that. But from having watched the first 2 games under Sean Dyche against Liverpool and Arsenal, I think Coleman's actually played pretty well, so I don't know if there is a rush to get Patterson back into the side. I also don't think it's necessarily something for FPL managers to worry about, because if you are hopeful that eventually he becomes first choice and he can use the next few game weeks to build up that fitness, well, Everton players are still pretty decent to hold, especially when they're that cheap and on your bench, because they play in 28 and Game Week 32, and obviously you can use the extra funds by not having an expensive player there elsewhere. So I think I wouldn't worry if I had Patterson just yet. I'd reassess maybe in Game Week 25 and see what Sean Dyche has to say. It does feel like a bit of a luxury to remove a double Game Week player, but if the rest of your squad is set and you get to Game Week 25 and there's no more positive news about him being back into the first team squad, I think you can just sell him at that point, even if it's what would look like a sideways transfer to James Tarkowski. So we don't know if he's going to be back for 25 yet, but I feel like it's unlikely he's going to start both games. You might get one start, but even that feels quite unlikely at this point. So I wanted to talk about Gabriel Martinelli because I know a lot of you would have kept him for the double game week last week, but he's still being quite heavily sold this week. I think nearly 200,000 FPL managers have already sold him ahead of game week 24. And I thought this was interesting in Arteta's press conference. So he was basically asked whether Leandro Trossard deserves to start a game soon. And his reply was he's had an impact every time he's been on the field, so he's an option. Now, I wouldn't panic about what he said there because ultimately he's trying to keep both players happy. He's not going to turn around and say, no, Gabriel Martinelli is my number one. He's always going to start. Trossard is going to have to make do with minutes off the bench. He needs Trossard to think that there's a chance he can start. So when he comes on, he performs really well. For what it's worth, I think it's pretty clear that Martinelli is still first choice. That hasn't really changed over the last few weeks. But Trossard is an option. At some point, he might start, especially when the fixtures start to pile up a bit with double game weeks, Europe and stuff like that. It might be that Trossard is the player that gets used in Europe, and that's actually a good thing for Martinelli in the league, but we don't know that yet until we start seeing those games happen. What is clear is Trossard is having an impact on Martinelli's minutes. So if you look at the last three fixtures, he played 75 against Man City, 61 against Brentford, although as I said before, Trossard was ready to come on before the 60th minute. The ball just didn't go out of play, and only 58 minutes against Everton. Previous three fixtures, 81, 78, 90. The one before that, 90, 87, 90. So he is going to be subbed more often because of Trossard. I think we can all agree on that. A lot of it is going to depend on how the game is going. I think in fixtures where the defence is difficult to break down, like Everton, like Brentford, he might make that change sooner rather than later. But Martinelli is going to lose minutes. So the question is, do you still need to transfer him out? Now, Arsenal are still quite important to us. I know I've briefly mentioned that some people might want a wild card in game week 27, but I think for a lot of people, you may not use a chip until game week 29 at the earliest. And if that's the case, Arsenal's fixtures still look really good. They've got Villa away, then a double game week, Bournemouth at home, Fulham away in 27, and they play in blank game week 28 against Crystal Palace. So if you've got a spare transfer, I still think that Odegaard and Saka are better than Martinelli, but it is very much a luxury. And given that it's only a single game week this week against Villa away, there's not a rush to kind of get rid of him this week. It would probably be more important to do it for the double. But of course, if he keeps starting and getting to 60, 70 minutes, he can absolutely outscore both of those players as well. So lots of people have already removed him this week. I don't think he's a huge panic. I think this kind of answer is going to be the same every week. He's not a huge panic to get rid of. He is a bit of a luxury transfer, but he is going to continue to lose minutes and have less than he had before, and therefore has got less time on the pitch to score as well. So I haven't got him. I sold him last week. It didn't work out. I'm happy about that decision. Even if you don't do it this week, I guess you'll probably still be thinking about it next week. If you've got the money and you don't own him, it's Saka. If not, it's probably still Odegaard. I know the goals maybe dried up a little bit with him, but I still think he is the better pick just because of the better minutes that he gets. And like I said, Arsenal's still quite important to us. So this is just something to keep an eye on. You don't have to necessarily go out and buy him straight away, but I mentioned Alexis Mac Allister on my watch list video earlier this week. I'd seen a few people on Twitter discussing how well he'd done in that number 10 position against Crystal Palace, and then we wondered how long Lallana might be out for. Well, De Zerbi said that Adam Lallana has a big injury and he will be out for a long time. Now, we don't know exactly how long that is, but to me that sounds like months rather than weeks, and Mac Allister may now get a run in that number 10 spot rather than playing deeper. And the reason that I like that is, one, the game against Crystal Palace was really encouraging. He had 7 shots, 1.4 expected goals, 0.2 expected assists. So he looked really good. We also saw in the World Cup how good he is when he's closer to goal, but also he's nailed on and on penalties. Now, when he plays that deeper role, his expected data numbers, expected goals, expected assists are quite a bit lower. But if you're playing as a number 10, you would expect that to increase. So I'm not saying go out and buy him this week because he blanks in game week 25 anyway, and Mitoma might well be the better option to still bring in if you don't already own him. But we can watch the Fulham game and see what happens before we get to game week 26. And if Lallana is out for a long time, as De Zerbi has said, Mac Allister could be just as good as Mitoma, if not slightly better. It might even be a position for some of you where you might be able to fit in 2 Brighton attackers for that double in game week 27, as long as it goes ahead, where you could have Mitoma and McAllister depending on how you're set up. That might be easier if you're on like a 3-5-2 instead of a 3-4-3. But I think it's interesting. Let's see what happens against Fulham. Someone else may end up playing there and McAllister might go deeper. But if he stays there and performs well again, I think he'll get a lot of interest because he's a much bigger differential than Mitoma and he's got penalties as well. So just to put a bit of a spanner in the works for the double game week for Brighton in game week 27, you can see this tweet from Ben that says Brighton and Palace might not get a double game week in game week 27. And the tweet that he's quoting says there's rail strikes on the day of the rearranged Brighton versus Palace match, which was postponed due to rail strikes. So it got postponed due to rail strikes. Now it's back on. And on that day, there's rail strikes again. Now I heard James on his podcast on Planet FPL mention this before it was talked about, saying it could happen, and he thinks the match will just go ahead anyway. He doesn't think they'll postpone it again. They'll just make them get coaches and stuff like that to the match instead. But it is something that could happen, right? That match could get called off again. Now Brighton do have 2 other fixtures to rearrange, which are Bournemouth and Newcastle. I've already seen Ben say that the Newcastle game cannot go into game week 27. The Bournemouth game possibly could, but obviously the closer we get to that, the less likely of a fixture being rearranged at that short notice. I don't think we should panic about this. If you've got your Brighton players in place already and you're going to hold them through game week 25, you should probably stick to that plan. And those of us that don't have Brighton players yet, that maybe we're getting in 25 and 26, we can just wait on a little bit longer and see what happens. It might be that Brighton still have a double game week. It just gets turned into Brighton and Leeds and Brighton and Bournemouth instead of having the Crystal Palace fixture there. But it's just something to take note of. I guess if you were in 2 minds about whether to get the Brighton player or someone else, you could just go for someone else instead. But there is also the chance that nothing happens whatsoever and this doesn't get postponed again. But I'll try and keep you updated on it. It would be interesting. I know for me, for my team, it would be much easier to manage the next few weeks if Brighton didn't have a double game week that week. But as it stands, it's still on. And remember, the other game doesn't matter for this, right? The Brentford and Southampton double, that should still go ahead regardless. So Ivan Toney will still have his double in game week 27. So I've seen more and more people considering this now. Is it unthinkable to transfer out Trippier this week? I have 5 players who blank in game week 25. I want to keep Toney and Mitoma for the upcoming double game week. And I think it's perfectly reasonable to want to keep Mitoma, even with everything I've just said about the rail strikes, because there is every chance that double will still go ahead. And he's got Fulham at home this week. So it makes sense why you want to keep hold of him. My other players are Shaw and Rashford. Now, I will say straight away, and this applies to everyone, you don't necessarily need to go into game week 25 with 11 players, right? It's going to be very team dependent. And I do think in your scenario, you can sell Luke Shaw at some point. You might not want to do it this week because it's Leicester at home, but I think from game week 25, you can get rid of him. And I'll talk about why in a minute. But even if you did do that and you still had Toney, Mitoma, Rashford and Trippier, you could just play with 10 players. Now, you might well lose a few points in game week 25, but you could gain quite a few later by having less transfers to use on those players that a lot of us are going to want. I'm going into game week 25 and I'll probably, unless like injuries and stuff happen, very easily get out 11 players with 2 free transfers in 25, but I don't have any players for the double game week. No Toney, no Mitoma, no Sanchez, no kind of defender from Brighton or anything like that. So I'm going to have to use transfers, which could put me down on points later on. So you might lose some now, and I might score slightly more than you in 25, but later on I'll probably score slightly less, right? So there is that option as well. The reason that I say Luke Shaw can be sold is because, yes, Man United are defending very well. Yes, he's attacking and stuff like that. But they will definitely blank in 25. They've got to play Liverpool away in 26, which is going to be tough to get a clean sheet. And this fixture in game week 28 is one of the most likely to be called off because of the FA Cup. Because it's very likely that Brighton and Man United will get through. So this fixture would then be off. So yes, you'd miss Southampton at home, which looks very good for Luke Shaw, Rashford, etc. But that's the only thing you're really missing by getting rid of him. I get that, you know, for this week, you'd rather have Shaw against Leicester at home than Trippier against Liverpool home. But in the long run, up until game week 28, I think Trippier is the better option. The reason that it's not completely crazy to think about getting rid of him, though, is because in the next 3 game weeks, I don't see a clean sheet for Liverpool, right? Their defensive numbers are very, very good. For expected goals conceded in the league this season, per 90 minutes, they're the second best. They're just behind Man City and they're just ahead of Arsenal. That could change quite easily over the next few weeks. And although Liverpool have put in some poor performances recently, haven't got the results, they continue to generate a lot of chances. And since the World Cup, they are quite far behind on goals versus expected goals. And at some point, that might catch up. I'm not saying they're going to go and batter Newcastle or anything like that, but can Liverpool score one goal against Newcastle? I think that's, a fully reasonable expectation to have, that they could score one. They're obviously not going to get a clean sheet in 25 because they're not playing. And then in game week 26 is Man City away. That's even harder than Liverpool. They'll almost certainly concede in that game. So if you could sell Trippier to get him back later on, that might be worthwhile. But that's 2 transfers for a player who has really good attacking numbers, who could possibly concede twice against Liverpool and Man City, but still get assists in both games and still be worthwhile holding. Then they've got Wolves at home, which is nice. Then they've got a guaranteed fixture in game week 28 against Forest. And then, okay, Man United is not necessarily great, but then it's Brentford, Villa, etc. This fixture run, you wouldn't usually look at getting Trippier or getting rid of Trippier for it. So I think if you get rid of him, you've probably got to have a plan to get him back at some point, because I don't think he's suddenly become a bad option or anything like that. And also for a lot of you, you'll have a lot of money tied up in him. Like if you look at my team, it's a little bit different because I got on him late, as you know. I bought him for 5.6 and he's gone up to 6.1. So if I sell him, I get 5.8 million. And it would cost me 0.3 to get him back. For any of you that got him for 5 million, it's even more. And I pretty much just wouldn't do it in that scenario. So for this specific question, you are in a tough spot where you're already quite well set up for 27, and you might well be worth just losing a few points now. But I do think Luke Shaw can go. Rashford is trickier. I have actually looked at selling him because Liverpool away, okay, he could score in that game because he's doing really well right now. Then Southampton at home would be horrible to lose him for. But 25 and 28, he's not going to play. So I have looked at it, but I'm much less keen on selling Rashford than I was for Luke Shaw. But like I said, you are just in a tricky situation where you're well set up for later on, and you might just have to take a hit on points. And I don't mean literal points hits. I just mean having less players for game week 25. And look, at the end of the day, you might come out of game week 25 with 10 players, just as good as those of us with 11. And then you're also up on players for the double as well. So try not to panic about having 11 too much. But I do think Shaw can be sold. With Trippier, not crazy to sell him, but I think for most people, it's probably just going to be worth holding on to him. So nice and simple, is Ben White still first choice? And you'd have to say we haven't really seen anything to suggest otherwise. So I would presume that yes, he is first choice. That doesn't mean that he's nailed on to start every single game. And it doesn't mean when he does start that he's going to get to 80 to 90 minutes, because we have seen him subbed off early quite a few times. Now, of course, if you're a Ben White owner and he comes off in the 65th minute with a clean sheet locked in, you're really happy with that. Even though he's got less time to get you a goal or an assist, the clean sheet's locked in, that's all you need. It does mean that he could come off before the 60th minute in some games as well, which we have seen, mostly because Tomiyasu is just waiting there to come on whenever Arteta needs him. And if Arteta thinks there's a game where Tomiyasu is better suited to start, or he wants to rest Ben White, that could also happen as well, as it did against Man City. Now, some people might turn around and say Tomiyasu didn't play that well in that game. He gave away the kind of goal that De Bruyne scored, and his general play wasn't brilliant, but it was also against Man City. They are a difficult team to play against for anyone, and we should remember that it wasn't too long ago that Ben White had to come off at half-time because he was on a yellow card against Marcus Rashford, and of course, Tomiyasu was just waiting there so Arteta could make that switch. So I don't think if you're a Ben White owner, you need to panic, right? I do think he's first choice, but does that mean he's going to start the next 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 fixtures in a row? Probably not, but he might start 6 in every 7, 7 in every 8, and still be well worthwhile to keep hold of as an FPL manager. I think it's a similar situation to Martinelli in that if you've got the funds or you've got the spare transfer to switch to a Zinchenko or a Gabriel, that might be worth it. But if you've got other transfers that you need to do because you need to prepare for the blank or for the doubles in 27, and you're just going to risk keeping hold of Ben White, I think that's perfectly okay to do as well. So what are my thoughts on James Maddison and the other Leicester attackers? And to be honest, it is quite difficult to ignore them because they've just scored 4 goals against Spurs right after scoring 4 goals against Aston Villa, and they've got this set up with Iheanacho as the 9 and then Tete, Maddison and Barnes behind, and it does seem to have clicked quite nicely. And price-wise, they're all pretty decently priced, right? James Maddison is still 8 million, but he's been quite a consistent FPL player for a long time now. So I think if people wanted to find a slot for him in their squads, they could. Tete, obviously, we haven't seen a huge amount from, but he looks decent as a punt for 5.5 million if you've got a spare midfield slot. And then Iheanacho, I think he's one of those players that just always seems to deliver when he gets minutes. Whether or not Brendan Rodgers will continue playing him, we'll have to wait and see. But it's gone so well in the last 2 games, I'd find it hard to see him being dropped. So I don't mind him at 6.1 million. I think if the fixtures were better, I could be almost persuaded to do Mitrovic to Iheanacho, but the fixtures do put me off a little bit because, yes, they've done really well to put 4 goals against Spurs. No one was expecting that. 4 goals against Villa. Look, I'm not saying I expect Villa to concede 4 goals every single game, but I guess it's not completely out of the question that could happen. Going forward, like Man United away is going to be much tougher. So is Arsenal at home. Southampton away is not that bad, but then they've got to play Chelsea at home. So they've got to play 3 of the traditional top 6 in the next 4 game weeks. And the fixture in 28 is not guaranteed to be on because Leicester are still in the FA Cup. Now, to be fair to Leicester, they are a team that I think whatever game they go into, even if they're not favourites to win it, you always expect them to score. So could Iheanacho at 6.1 million, even with these difficult fixtures, still get returns? Possibly. Same with James Maddison. I just feel like I'm picturing most people's squads right now with Rashford, possibly one of De Bruyne, Salah or Kane, Haaland. You know, there's Mahrez maybe as well. I just don't know where the midfield 3 slots are coming from. Like, even me with 5 midfielders, I've got Saka, Odegaard, Fernandes, Rashford, Salah. Like, where am I fitting in a James Maddison? I'm probably not. Even if I sell Fernandes in game week 25, which I probably will, I still probably won't go for James Maddison. And then up front, there's a few more slots, but everyone's looking at João Felix, better fixtures. He might also be on penalties as well. I didn't talk about that, but he might be on penalties. We don't know, because obviously Jorginho's gone now. Mount doesn't have a great record. It could be Havertz, maybe João Felix. Anyway, otherwise people have still got Mitrovic, maybe looking at Tony later on. I just feel like it's kind of bad timing for Leicester players. So I think they look good. I think the prices are good. And I think there's every chance they're the type of players that even with bad fixtures could go and get points. But for most people FPL squad, I just don't think they need them. So I just want to talk about the final decisions for my own team. Now, what you're seeing on screen is from a website called FPL.team. It's completely free if you want to go and use it as well. Now, as I said on team selection, I'm going to captain Haaland. I do get the appeal of going for Rashford. He's got a home fixture against Leicester. And while I do think the Leicester Attackers can cause problems to most teams, I do not rate the defence whatsoever. And I think they're in the bottom 3 for expected goals conceded per 90 in the league so far this season. And obviously, Rashford's in ridiculous form as well. So do I think he can score in this game? Absolutely. But Haaland is Haaland, and we can talk all we want about his away form since the World Cup, but 3 of those fixtures were Man United, Chelsea and Spurs. On paper, quite difficult. The only easy one on paper was Leeds away, and he got a 13-pointer. So going against Nottingham Forest is not really something that I'm afraid of when it comes to having to captain Haaland. I will say the Nottingham Forest defence has probably been a bit better than I expected. I think they're sitting 12th for expected goals conceded per 90, but very difficult to have to play against Man City. So I don't see any reason to take it off Haaland. I'm not worried about Champions League. We saw this earlier on in the season that when he's fit, he just starts. And if they go 2 or 3-0 up by the 60th minute, then yeah, maybe he'll come off then and hopefully he's got some returns. But I don't see the Champions League as a huge issue. The only thing I guess to say is they're getting into the latter round, so it is going to be more difficult and maybe Pep won't want to risk it that much, but also they're trying to win the league at the same time. So I think Haaland starts. I don't have issues with that. The other kind of decision I've got to make is whether to play or which 3 of my defenders to play. I'm definitely going to play Gabriel, and I'm definitely going to play Trippier as well. Yes, I think there's a high chance of Liverpool scoring, but there's not enough upside in benching him for me because that is a good defence, that Newcastle defence, and obviously Trippier is very attacking as well. So the only decision is Tarkowski versus Ake, and I'm just not convinced that Ake is going to start. I think Laporte is going to come back in, and it doesn't mean that Ake can't play as well. I just think it's less likely, and I think he'll probably get saved for the Champions League. And look, I'm not massively happy about it because I think Everton will probably concede, but I think I've got to play the guy that I'm more hopeful will start. Because if I play Ake and he doesn't start, there is a chance that he comes on as well. It's one of those decisions that could make me look really stupid, because if Ake plays, then there's every chance he gets a clean sheet, and there's every chance that Tarkowski will concede. But I'm just going to hope that he either doesn't, or he just puts in one of those bullet headers, which he seems to be really good at now. He hit the post against Liverpool and scored in the game before that. So we'll see what happens, but I'm probably going to start him. In terms of transfers, I've only got one free transfer. I don't see a good single transfer move that improves my team massively for game week 25. The only one I've really looked at is a hit, right? So that would be Ederson out for Kepa, which obviously a lot of you have, and then Mitrovic to João Felix, who is getting more and more popular, but is still somewhat of a differential. And they've got Southampton at home this week, which is obviously a nice fixture. That would be for a 4-point hit. And they do play in 25. My only concern is, so do Mitrovic and Ederson. They also play in 25. And look, Ederson has been so frustrating. I would love to just, I'd even thought if he gets a red card, that would be good, because I'd have an excuse to get rid of him. But he's got Forest away, then Bournemouth away, then Newcastle at home, then Palace away. If I had to keep him for those 4 fixtures, it wouldn't be the end of the world. And I'm still having to make 2 transfers in game week 25 to get my team to 11 players, especially if I don't think I can rely on Ake. It would look something like this. So I'd have to take a hit this week to then still take a hit next week. Whereas if I save the transfer in game week 24 and just roll it, this would be the team in 25. Again, I would still play the same players, but I'd have 2 free transfers to do something. I could work out however I wanted, but it could be something like Bailey in for Fernandes and Ake to Trent. And that gives me 11 players. If I wanted to, I could also get Mitoma in here instead, who obviously doesn't have a fixture, and then possibly upgrade Greenwood to someone that's 6.5 or below. Maybe Iheanacho, or possibly just someone like Gnonto. And that would still cost me -4, but I wouldn't have had to take a hit this week. And then going forward, obviously, I'd have that extra bench player, because Gnonto seems to be a regular starter. The fixture in 28 is not guaranteed to be on, but if the Liverpool-Fulham game is off, then the Leeds-Wolves game would be on, and then I'd have Gnonto ready for that as well. So I don't think Ederson to Kepa in 24 and Mitrovic to João Felix is a bad move, but I just feel like if I was doing well right now, would I consider that move? Probably not. But then maybe not doing those moves is why I'm doing badly. And I think sometimes when you are doing badly, you're on a run of red arrows, you do tend to overthink things a little bit more. So I love your opinion. I've got to be honest. I think because it's Ederson and Mitrovic, most people would just say to sell them because they'd be sick of them, and João Felix and Kepa look so good. But I think the best move is just to roll and see how I feel next week, because we might get new information about those rail strikes. Maybe we get the game week 29 fixtures, which does seem unlikely. But we're just another week closer to the blank and double game weeks, and I'd have 2 free transfers. And ultimately, I know I keep saying this and it keeps doing badly. I don't think this team looks that bad, right? I think people keep talking to me about, or keep leaving comments like, you should have more of a template team and only a few differentials. But I would say that Rashford, Odegaard, Saka, an Arsenal defender, Trippier, and Haaland, 6 of my 11 are definitely template. I think you can absolutely make a case to have Salah instead of De Bruyne and Kane right now. Fernandes is a perfectly good differential against Leicester, and I'm going to use the funds next week. So the only real issues are Ederson, Tarkowski, and Mitrovic. And look, Ederson has been really bad, and I know that Chelsea are going to get a clean sheet against Southampton, so I'll already be behind with Ederson again. But with Nottingham Forest away, I think it's reasonable to keep hold of him. So, yeah, we go into another game week where I'm quite happy about my team, but that doesn't make me very confident about a green arrow. But we'll see how it goes. Let me know what you think about anything I've said in this video in the comments below. Give it a like if you enjoyed it. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. And I'll catch you again tomorrow for the deadline stream.